I'm Marshall Shannon with Ministry Design Training. Welcome to our webinar, Understanding Your Code. Let me explain to you why we've taken time to explain to you something that really isn't dealt with very often, and that is understanding the code of your congregation is imperative for you to have long-term success in leading your church through the stages of growth that churches go through as they go from level to level, both in age and also in your size of your church, and then the spiritual development of your church. Years ago, 20 years actually, I went to one of my mentors who was pastoring a church much older, and he was much older than myself, and he had helped me as I took a church and restarted it and grew the ministry there. And the church had adopted in its early days before I came a policy that at a certain point in our growth cycle was prohibiting our advancement. It was going to hinder our future. And my mentor had the same exact policy at his church. And so I went to him and sought his advice about how to make the key policy change. And my mentor had made the same change in his church some years before. His effort was successful. No one pushed back, no one fussed, no one left the ministry there. I followed his directions and method for making the change. And where he lost no one, I lost 58 people in one weekend. And what was the difference? Well, the difference was congregational codes. He didn't violate his, and I did violate our code. I approached it in a way where the people did not accept, out of their very code in essence, they did not accept the change that we were recommending, and people left. The interesting thing is, when I look at the two churches, the policy change was the same, but so was the denomination of our churches, the demographics of our churches, the psychographics of our churches. Our belief system and worldview were pretty much the same. Theologically, worldview, our eclographics, we could argue, were very similar in the way that our congregations were put together. And yet, there was an invisible code that made up each congregations that were distinct, unique, and different from each other. And he reaped the blessing of leading within and understanding his code, and I did not. And so as we go through this webinar, we're going to look at the discovery phase. Let me help you understand at the front of this ministry design training. We've broken it down into 4 phases: discovery, design, delivery, and direction. And we want you to understand that there are different things you do to progress when going through your ministry design to take you from the discovery phase through the direction phase. Your code as a congregation, think of it as the soil that has to be able to support what you're going to build on it in your ministry design. Your core values, mission, vision, and strategic planning are resting the weight of their value and productivity, performance on your congregational code. Failure to understand and correctly identify your code will mean that your ministry design is resting on unsafe soil, resting on a fault. Think of the man in Scripture who built his house on the sand. And so as we go through this, we're going to look, and this is where identifying and understanding your code falls in the discovery phase, that we want to, right off the bat, identify and define code. What is it? Well, first, it has been defined as the essence or the soul of your church, of any organization. It is the basic material that makes up your church, your congregation. It is at the center or core. It is a seed or a kernel. It is the beginning or the root. It is such as your nature. You can't separate your nature from yourself. Your essential qualities. It's necessary for you to be you, for you to have essential quality about you, and it differs from person to person. The nucleus or center of who you are, the base or foundation. It's been defined as the primary elements of a person or a group of people. At the very heart of who you are is the essence or the soul of who you are. Along with the basic material, it is also looked at as the distinctive quality. So every congregation has a unique essence or soul that is made up of basic material. At the very center of who you are is a distinct quality. This essence can usually be captured in a handful of words or short phrases. The Unabridged Dictionary refers to or defines code as a collection of several things: organized laws, rules or regulations, a set of rules and principles applied in the life of a specific group of people. A group's code is marked and represented and identifies them. It often is viewed as a set of conduct, expectations, such as a gentleman's code of conduct. And so as you begin trying to get your mind wrapped around what we mean by code and why it is so important and how we discover it, we want you to understand at the outset that it's been defined as an essence or soul, and it then is a collective identity of a given culture, and as the shared norms adopted by the group within that particular culture. So code exists at two levels. Code exists at two levels. Kevin Ford, in his book Transforming Church, talks about this. He says that it exists at two levels: macro, which is the big story, and micro, which is the individual story. So the macro code, for instance, for our country here in the United States, the American story, we value at our code freedom, pioneering spirit, exploration, and discovery. The Bible's key elements in its macro story, its macro code, deals with the key elements of God's redemption, his covenant with us, his revelation of himself and our future, and his promises to us, and any number of other things that are a part of the overall story. The micro code is underneath the macro code and has to be in alignment with it, so that every American, if you come to our country and go through the normal legal process for becoming a citizen of the United States, you're going to have to pledge allegiance to the United States, and you as an American are going to have to be in alignment with America. So each American in every state in the Union has a role to play within the bigger macro code of our country. And every believer and church has a role to play within the bigger macro code of Scripture. And if it gets out of alignment, you've got to do some work to bring it back into alignment. So alignment with the macro code is crucial to your church being healthy. Just as to have a healthy country, we have to have every American in alignment with the macro code of America, so that every church that's going to be healthy is going to have to be in alignment with the Bible, with the Scriptures. And this alignment of us to our church and our church to the Scriptures allows for unity in the midst of diversity. This alignment allows for success in any organization. The individual identity needs to be in alignment with the authority over it collectively, whether it be the citizen to the state or the citizen to the federal government in our country, or it be an individual to their church or the church to the Scriptures. Every church has a macro code that must be in alignment with the Scriptures, and a micro code that must be discovered that is their unique personality, essence, and identifier. And so the code, as we're talking about it in this context, deals with the personality and the identity, the very essence of who a person is. It, again, is like the air we breathe. It's invisible to the naked eye, but if it disappears, we notice it in just a couple of moments. Then the shape. The shape, and Rick Warren talks about this, and the disc profile. The shape is seen in the disc profile as a personality that is dominant, that's the D. The I is influential, the S is steadfast, and the C is compliant. And Rick Warren talks about the shape as being the S, spiritual gifts, H is heart, A is abilities, P is personality, and E is experience. And so as we talk about this is what we're talking about, and we're going to try and describe what we're talking about so you can get a richer understanding of what we mean by code. The description of code has some foundational truths. The first one that we want to talk about is every church has their own unique code. So does every Fortune 500 company, or every government, both federal, state, and local. Every school, every business, and every church has their own unique code. Just as I gave the example where my mentor in his church, he didn't have a problem changing the policy, and I did. And as I look back at it, it had to do with two distinct churches with distinct, unique codes, unique code. So think of some examples where you hear code blue. That's an emergency notification. Or Morse code, communication language that is given. A code book is a list of signals. Code name, it conceals a true identity. Code words are a substitute for more abrasive word or phrase that we would use to be polite. Genetic code, that's a biochemical instructions. Our genetic engineering is a code that alters the genetic code. Genetic markers, identifiers that mark the code. And genetics is the science of heredity. So every church has its own unique code. And this is not unusual, as I've just given you 7 or 8 different examples where the idea of code has its own unique code in the Morse code, or code blue, or a code name, or a code book, or a code word, or genetic code. And so understand that along with that, one of the foundational truths in understanding your church's code is that your unique code defines your identity and clarifies your purpose. Let me give you an example that Kevin Ford gives in his book, Transforming Church. He gives the example of this to help us understand this truth. Is the fast food industry. Their purpose is to sell food quickly and inexpensively. But when you look at their different codes, you see McDonald's wanted to have consistency and focus on kids. And so they franchised, were the first really to franchise, so you can go anywhere to get a Happy Meal for your children or a value meal or a combo for yourself as the adults. Burger King. You think of have it your way, customization. Subway's code, fresh and healthy. Taco Bell was the first to have the value menu, 39-cent taco. Arby's focused in their code was serving grown-ups, serving adults, where McDonald's was kids. Krispy Kreme broke away from Subway with their fresh and healthy and went to decadence as their code, and it was guilty pleasure that you had of biting into one of those glazed donuts. And when you begin to examine these companies, it provides us with some interesting facts. Here's the same industry, fast food, with somewhat the same customers, with pulling from the same pool of employees to come in and run their companies, yet their personalities are completely different. Their code makes them unique from each other. They are different from each other. A noted problem Kevin points out with code is that over time, an industry begins to develop a code. So the fast food industry began to develop a code. And the genetic DNA of the prominent players, the key players in the fast food industry, begin to merge. They begin to melt together like a melting pot. And pretty soon, they all look the same. If you look at it, McDonald's led the way in the consistency marker identifier. Now, all of those franchises, all of those companies have a measure of consistency. Taco Bell led the way in the value menu. Now all of them offer it. The result, as the identities are diluted, the customers can become apathetic because they don't see any distinction. My father, who was in the food industry as a food broker, explained to me why, as we went out to eat as a family when I was growing up, why the restaurants did not break away and isolate themselves from everyone else, but they clustered together. And that was people went there, then decided what they wanted to eat. But there has to be distinct markers between the different restaurants. So if you have a Crystal, a Burger King, a Wendy's, an Arby's, a McDonald's, a Hardee's, and take your pick and name your franchise, that they're distinct in what you're wanting. And so here's what has happened to churches in North America. All of a sudden, we merged together and melted together, and the genetic DNA of church began to merge, and pretty soon we all began to look the same to the country and to the citizens of our country, and people became apathetic. And so we've got to have a solution to this, is that organizations or churches must constantly look at their code and understand their code is unique from their industry. And so your church, in order to be successful, needs to be able to look. And this is where the American church has experienced problems. The average church has no idea what makes them unique or different from other churches. Insiders can distinguish the doctrinal and theological differences, but they don't constitute code. Code is not necessarily about your beliefs, even though you have a system of beliefs. Code is about personality and identity. Code is about who we are, our personal and collective genetic markers. It is what makes us different from every other church. We think of church in stereotypical terms. The media lumps us together and we lose our distinction because we have allowed the industry code to define us. So here's the solution for you as a church. A healthy, fit, productive, and successful church is built upon a clear, guiding, and distinctive code. We need code clarity just as we need vision clarity. You've heard about vision clarity? Every church has a code, whether they realize it or not, whether they identify it and understand it or not. Few have taken the time to discover their code. It's what makes your church different from the one down the street or across your street or in your denomination or association. So, the third foundational truth is that our code shapes our culture, our values, our focus, and mission. It creates our core ideology. It creates a context for our vision and strategy to emerge and develop. It shapes the stories we tell, the rituals we observe, the unspoken rules we follow. Therefore, it is critical that your congregation be committed to a healthy code because the code sets the direction of your church. It serves as your compass. It keeps your people rowing in sync and in the same direction. Your code must be clear, and your people must be committed to it, or trouble occurs. You'll row in circles, so to speak, or stall out entirely. Code shapes the face of how the church, your church, displays itself to the world. Code shapes tradition in values, in mission. Code is usually not rational. For example, two of my churches that are in the same town that I happen to know about. One of them, in their code, in the essence of who they are, is really gifted at developing leaders, and they focus, and leadership is recognized and rewarded. And they give people in their congregation lots of opportunities to step up to the plate and lead. They are developing leaders. A sister church, and these churches are very similar in their worship, in their doctrine, and a number of other things. But in their code, they are completely different. The other one is in the business of developing shepherds. Two different types of believers, but in their code, they're successful when they live out their code. And both churches are winning people to Christ and growing their congregations and ministering to their communities. They are healthy, fit churches, but they have allowed who they are and their persons to shape their culture, what they value. Their mission flows out of it, and as they've discovered God's vision for their ministries, they are pursuing God and pursuing his vision. They have created a strategic plan to do that. So their focus is flowing out of their code. Really, churches fail for one main reason. The leaders ignore the church's code. You can't really lead and be blind about who your congregation really is. Member turnover is due to a mismatch between the corporate code and personal code. By cracking your code, you can unlock the power of your people, your ministries, your services to each other and to your community. And when this happens, you can experience genuine transformation. Your code can give your church a sense of collective personality and uniqueness. It can define each fellowship as one of a kind. It sets you apart and directs your effort. People who buy into your code and understand that they are matched up with it is something that can energize your congregation as individuals and as groups and as individual ministries and programs in your church. So code is difficult to define because it's invisible. It's like the air we breathe. Generally, it is a right brain effort and not a left brain effort. It's in intuition versus logic. And your code may be in plain sight, but not plainly seen. We menfolk, we're very accustomed to thinking with our logic and reason. And we make our decisions based on that. Sometimes our theology is based on that. But when it comes to fully understanding your code individually and as a congregation, you're going to have to look at it with your right brain as opposed to your left brain, to think with your intuition, to see in a different way. And this may be completely foreign to you as a leader and as a person. Along with this, here's the fourth truth that I want to emphasize today. Being out of alignment with your code may be the single biggest cause of conflict in your congregation. It causes more damage than clashes over worship style, music, standards, theology, doctrine. Take your pick. Incongruence with your code can be highly destructive to your church. If you go and follow through as I want you to with building your ministry design, identifying your core values, defining your mission, discovering God's vision for your ministry, and developing a game plan to fulfill that mission so you can reach God's preferred future for you. And you do that out of alignment with who you are because you've adopted somebody else's ministry design. You're going to fail. And you may fail early or you may fail some time down the line. But history has shown that if you're out of alignment with who you are and who God's made you through both your nature and nurture, that you're going to have problems. You're going to build a house upon the sand. So let me ask you this. How are codes formed? How did this happen? Everyone's got one. Individually and groups of people get together, they have one. And it's portrayed by our culture. What is traditional, what's the rules and the standards by which we live and how we think. Our codes are developing those things. So how are they formed? Well, first, nature. God makes us and forms us. When I talked about the DISC behavioral code, the dominance, the D, and the influential, steadfastness, and compliant, God makes us in the womb that way and gives us a personality. And we come out of the womb. Remember, one of the men that I pastored for years said that his oldest child just came out very dominant and stubborn and has been that way all of her life. That's a personality type, identifying who you are. But also in nature, we're given a certain amount of intuition versus that of logic. And many people are very logical and reasonable in their thinking, and they see things in black and white. They're black and white. They're linear in their planning, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. But there's a certain amount of intuition that God needs to help us and give us his wisdom to understand what he is doing in us. So intuition versus your logic. And then there's nurture and how it's formed. So God is doing certain things in the womb, and then he is doing certain things in us. It may be a trial, a James chapter 1, where he says, brethren, count it all joy when you fall into face different testing times in life, that he is doing it for his glory and our good. He is developing us into someone who will endure in the Christian walk during their lifetime as a believer, and maturing us. He wants to make us entire, complete, lacking nothing. And so in this, he has given us experiences that develop our code, and we live them out. And he is developing us. For instance, our experiences, we have experiences that combine with our nature. So during our life, our genetic makeup that God has put into place in the womb, and we're born and have these experiences, and they're forming our code. And the same happens for churches and groups of people. So what happens individually is now collectively pooled together with a group of people, and you've got to identify who these people are in Christ, what their personality types are, how their experiences have shaped and molded them. And Kevin Ford, in his book Transforming Church, gives this example that coffee, people drink it and long for it, but they don't necessarily like the taste of it, but they like the aroma of it. And so they go now, and you'll find at Starbucks and any number of other places would mask the raw taste of coffee with different ingredients. But people have an experience when you smell coffee. I remember my next door neighbor who smoked cigars, and the fragrance of that, and I grew up going over to their house. He cut in his yard, and he'd be sitting out on his patio or in his den smoking his cigar, and it had a certain aroma. And so you think of a person's experience, it leaves an imprint. It leaves an imprint on us. When I smell a cigar, think of Mr. Ferrezi. When I smell coffee, I may think of a certain experience. When my dad would drive us from our hometown in Alabama to Wyoming, where he was born and reared, he would roll down the window of the car, stick his head out, and take a deep breath of the Wyoming crisp, clear, dry air and go, "Ha." And he had all these memories that came rushing back to him because he remembered experiences in life, and he would begin to tell us about all the different areas in his experience growing up. And so we think of big and small experiences in life that are shaping and molding us. So nature and nurture is working together to form our code individually and as a congregation. So here is a truth. Our emotional imprints define all areas of our life, including our understanding of church and congregations. We tend to gravitate toward or away from churches based on our early memories of churches, the imprints that we had, the experiences that we have. And we often gravitate toward church because of strong emotional imprints that drive us subconsciously. It is made up of our collective personality, shared intuition, and cultural norms. And so when you go to look at how code is developed, understand that people are coming to your church probably, and this is argumentative, I understand that, not because of your theology first, or your doctrines, or your standards, or your type of worship, but because their code, they instinctively sense within just a matter of moments that your codes are congruent or out of congruence, uncongruent. They're either in alignment or they aren't. And they make a decision about returning the second time to your church because they see similarities in the very essence of who you are in your code. So understanding your code and how it has been developed will help you understand why people come and stay or won't come at all, or if they do come, why they don't come back. And this certainly is a part of how we are building our ministries. And so in your ministry design, understand your code is essential to proper design. Then we want to talk about the distinctions about code. First is how do code and culture differ? Code is your essence, and culture, your church culture, is the expression of your essence. Code is discovered, and culture is developed. So here's a rule. Churches must work to keep their operating culture in alignment with their code. There are three approaches to designing ministries, programs, and processes. And your culture must be kept in alignment with your code. And you've got some ministry design options that go with this. And here's what guys usually do. Guys will go sometimes, pastors, leadership teams, and design their ministries based out of their memory. They are remembering old ministry or an old program and want to use it again thinking that it will revive or work in their situation. It might, but that's one source or option to ministry design. The next one that is used often, and that is to mimic, to imitate, to borrow or import someone else's program or ministry. So you're using a copycat approach. Well, this program or ministry or process worked at a sister church or a big church that you know about that is seeing great success in winning folks to Christ, and you go and export and then import that program into your ministry and want it to work for you. Or the third way is that you do master planning or masterpiecing. You are going to use your imagination and discern what God is thinking, and you're going to take and become creative, and you're going to customize your ministry design because it comes out of the very soul of God as to how you're designing to carry out your mission. And so you have to wait on God. It's a spiritual journey. It also involves some exercises that we're going to take you through, but that you don't bypass through simply doing something you did years ago through memory, or you're going to mimic and copy what someone else is doing. And think of it like this. If I die, but I give my heart to you, and you're going to transplant it because you need a heart transplant, they can't just come get mine because I'm willing to give it to you and plug it into your body and it work. Your code, your genetic DNA needs to be in alignment with mine for that to work. So if you're going to borrow everyone else's programming or ministry model, then it has to be genetically, your codes have to be similar enough that your body won't reject it. So here's the problem. In the memory one, times change and so do methods. In the mimicry, codes differ. You don't franchise another church's ministry design. It inhibits your true community development when you borrow a program that doesn't fit your code. And it's difficult to find ways to bond people together in shared ministry if you've borrowed a program and it isn't congruent with who you are as a church. It doesn't fit your local context. It may not only not fit your code as a congregation, but not be the right ministry for your community that you're trying to reach with the gospel. It can refocus your leadership efforts then, and this is selfish, but it can refocus your leadership efforts to that of keeping the machinery running because you plugged and played somebody else's ministry model in. And if it doesn't match, then you're having to work to try and keep people plugged in against their will. They're shying away from or drifting away from or gravitating away from the program because they don't have an interest in it or it's just not who they are. And so now you've got a round peg trying to hammer it into a square hole. The mistake is we expect the same result from the program as those that you borrowed it from, and it's not likely going to happen. You bypass God by borrowing a program without consulting Him. We need to live by defining and aligning ourselves with our congregation's code. Well, I'm Marshall Shannon, your ministry design coach with ministry design training and concepts. You can reach me at Marshall or at either one of these two phone numbers, and I trust the Lord's blessing upon you as you continue to serve Him and as you begin this journey of designing your ministry.